Welcome to Tales by Tochi. These stories are real, unique and exceptional because they the African culture. Don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me, and also you will be able to enjoy and learn from these amazing stories. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The golden chandelier above the massive oak dining table glittered as Ivy Uma stared at her husband, Desmond. He was elegant as always, crisp in his navy suit, speaking into his phone with the effortless confidence that made women swoon and men tremble. He was the picture of power, wealth, and charm. Yet, beneath her poised smile and flawless makeup, Ivy's mind twisted with a storm of suspicion. The media painted their marriage as perfect, and perhaps it was, until the silence between them became louder than their conversations. Desmond was no ordinary man. He was a billionaire CEO with control over a massive empire. Women flocked to him like moths to flame, and despite his constant declarations of love, Ivy couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that maybe, just maybe, his loyalty was conditional. That fear had been growing quietly like a seed, ever since she discovered a red lipstick smudge on one of his white dress shirts, a shade she never wore. Ivy had always prided herself on being a strategist, a woman who didn't confront emotion with emotion. She believed in control, precision, and silent victories. If Desmond was indeed cheating, she wouldn't confront him with accusations. No, she would set a trap so cunning, so seamless, that even he wouldn't see it coming. She would create the perfect storm and observe from a safe distance. That was when the idea struck. She would test his loyalty herself. Not with rumors or tracking apps, but with temptation in the flesh. She would hire a house help, beautiful, curvy, young, and seductive. Someone impossible to ignore. If he passed, she'd finally silence her doubts. If he failed, then at least she'd have truth instead of illusion. That very night, she contacted a discreet staffing agency with specific instructions. The new maid must be curvaceous, dark-skinned, and young, someone who could turn heads without even trying. She wanted fire, to see if Desmond would burn. 2 weeks later, Amara arrived. She was 23 with smooth ebony skin, full hips, and a face that blended innocence with mischief. Her large, expressive eyes held a flicker of ambition, though she spoke softly, like someone still learning her place. Ivy pretended to be friendly, but her intentions were ice cold. She watched Desmond carefully the moment he laid eyes on Amara. His smile had twitched just slightly. It was enough. Ivy began monitoring his behavior with a hawk's precision. He started coming home earlier, then later, then oddly quiet. At first, nothing concrete happened. Desmond kept his distance, speaking to Amara only with the expected formality. But Ivy knew men like her husband. They were conquerors. And what man could resist the forbidden fruit placed so carefully in his home? Ivy sat in the shadows of her own making, convinced that the flame she had sparked would soon become a wildfire. What she didn't realize, however, was that she hadn't just lit a match, she had unleashed something far more dangerous. And soon even she would lose control. Desmond Uma was a man who had built his empire from the ground up. Power came naturally to him, and with it came discipline. He prided himself on loyalty not just in business but in love. He had always told himself that his wife, Ivy, was more than enough, beautiful, brilliant, and poised. Yet lately something had shifted in their marriage. The spark had faded, their conversations felt like formalities, and the warmth that once existed between them had turned cold. He blamed work, stress, and age, never suspecting that his wife's silences held a secret agenda. When Amara arrived in the mansion, he noticed her immediately. It was impossible not to. Her curves swayed like poetry, and her face held a certain raw beauty, unrefined yet magnetic. She was different from the women he was used to seeing at banquets and boardrooms. Desmond dismissed the initial attraction as mere male instinct. But each day she moved around the house, cleaning, bending, humming softly, a piece of his self-control cracked. Amara had been warned by the agency, "Do your job, keep your head low, and stay out of trouble." But when she saw the way Ivy looked at her, the cold gaze behind a fake smile, she knew something was off. She had worked for wealthy families before, but none had introduced her with such deliberate flair. Ivy made sure Desmond was present during her orientation, watching his reactions more than she paid attention to Amara herself. It didn't take long for Amara to realize she was a pawn in a much bigger game. Still, she needed the money. Her mother was ill, her younger siblings in school, and this job paid far more than others. So she decided to stay, to play the quiet, obedient maid and earn her salary in peace. But peace was a luxury that didn't last long. Desmond began to notice her more, their eyes meeting too often, accidental touches lingering a little too long. Amara tried to be professional, but even she wasn't made of steel. The man was handsome, confident, and powerful, and though she hated herself for it, she felt drawn to him. One evening, Desmond returned from a business trip and found the house nearly empty. Ivy had gone for a weekend retreat, and the other staff had retired to the quarters. Amara was in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing a simple gown that hugged her figure too well. She hadn't seen him come in. He stood by the doorway watching her stir a pot of soup, and for a moment, everything he had been suppressing surged forward. She turned and gasped slightly at his presence. "I didn't hear you come in, sir," she said nervously. He smiled. "You cook too?" he asked, stepping in. The distance between them closed with every breath. That night, temptation overwhelmed restraint. One moment of weakness, one kiss led to another, and by the time dawn broke, the line had been crossed. Desmond sat alone afterward, staring into the ceiling, haunted by what he had done, unaware that the woman beside him wasn't just a stranger, but the trigger to his destruction. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, her heart pounding like war drums against her chest. The events of the night had shaken her to her core. She had never imagined she would sleep with a married man, especially not the man of the house she worked in. Shame weighed heavily on her, but what terrified her more was the truth she carried. The truth Ivy would never want Desmond to know. She had been recruited into this house not just to clean, not just to serve, but to seduce. Though no one had said the word directly, the instructions from Ivy's assistant were clear. Be yourself. Don't hide your beauty. Make him notice you. Now that the act had been committed, Amara felt trapped between two burning walls. Desmond had been kind to her, even gentle. But she couldn't carry this secret any longer. It would destroy her from the inside. She had to tell him the truth no matter the consequence. She dressed, walked to his room with trembling hands and knocked. Desmond opened the door, surprised to see her, but the moment he looked into her eyes, he knew she wasn't just there for another round of passion. She was pale, shaking, her lips pressed tightly together. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. He let her in silently, his heart already beginning to race. Amara sat on the edge of his bed, gripping the hem of her dress. "Last night shouldn't have happened," she began. "But something worse is eating me up." Desmond listened intently as she slowly unraveled the truth, how she was hired specifically to tempt him, how Ivy had set the whole thing up as a test of loyalty. At first he didn't believe her. The idea that Ivy would orchestrate such deceit was unthinkable. But Amara's eyes held no trace of manipulation, only guilt. She even showed him the email message forwarded by the agency. Desmond's heart sank. A silence hung in the room that felt heavier than lead. The woman he had loved, trusted, built a life with, had set him up like an animal in a cage. Betrayal had never tasted this bitter. Desmond dismissed Amara gently, telling her to rest and not speak of this to anyone. But the moment she left, he exploded. He tore through his study, knocking books to the floor, sending glass crashing into the walls. His soul burned with rage. Not at Amara, she had been a tool. His fury was directed squarely at Ivy. How dare she question his loyalty? How dare she manipulate their marriage with such cruelty? He couldn't even mourn the infidelity. He had been provoked, lured into it. She had orchestrated his downfall and expected him to dance like a puppet. Desmond didn't sleep that night. He stared out his window until the sun rose, and by morning, his decision was made. He would confront her. But not with shouting, not with violence. Desmond Uma would destroy her the way only a billionaire could, legally, publicly, and with precision. He would file for divorce. Let the world know what she did. Let her drown in the scandal she created. It was no longer about marriage, it was about justice. Ivy returned from her weekend retreat with a sense of smug satisfaction. She had felt the shift. Something had changed in Desmond's energy, a quiet discomfort, a restlessness. She didn't know if the trap had fully sprung, but she was confident she'd have her answer soon. Yet the moment she walked into the mansion, she noticed something was off. The staff avoided eye contact. The usual warmth in Desmond's welcome was absent. Instead, he stood in the living room with his arms crossed, cold as granite. "We need to talk," he said curtly. Ivy raised an eyebrow but followed him into the study. He didn't wait for small talk. "I know everything," he said. "I know about Amara. I know why you hired her. I know it was all a test." Ivy's face paled instantly. She had not expected Amara to speak, at least not so soon. "Desmond, she began, but he cut her off. Don't insult my intelligence further." He tossed a file onto the table. It was the divorce papers. Panic gripped Ivy like a claw. She tried to protest, to spin the narrative in her favor, but Desmond wasn't listening. "You think this was about infidelity? No. This was about betrayal. You never trusted me. You never believed in me. You turned our marriage into a game. He was calm, but his voice carried the weight of thunder. Ivy's tears came not from heartbreak but from the dread of losing everything, the reputation, the lifestyle, the power. You slept with her, she said bitterly. So don't act like the victim. Desmond nodded. Yes, I did. And it's the only thing I regret, not because of you but because I allowed myself to be dragged into your twisted mind games. But now I'm done. With that he walked out, leaving her shaking in silence. The papers lay on the table mocking her. Her world was falling apart faster than she could gather her thoughts. In the weeks that followed, the scandal exploded. News outlets caught wind of the divorce. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed Desmond had cheated, others hinted at Ivy's manipulations. But the truth didn't matter in the court of public opinion, only perception did. Ivy's pride shattered. Her status among elite wives crumbled. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations dried up. The humiliation became unbearable. But beneath the heartbreak and regret, something darker began to grow. A hunger for vengeance. She had lost everything, and it was all because of Amara. That girl had opened her mouth, broken the silence, and destroyed Ivy's life. Desmond, too, was no longer a husband. He was now the enemy. If she couldn't have him, then no one would. And if she couldn't restore her pride, she would take their lives instead. Quietly, Ivy began to make arrangements. Because when a woman loses everything, she becomes capable of anything. Ivy sat in the dimly lit lounge of a private club in Ikoyi, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a glass of aged whiskey. Her eyes, once calm and composed, now burned with something darker, a storm of humiliation, betrayal, and seething anger. She had tried to reason with Desmond after the divorce papers, but he was unmoved, cold, and final in his decision. The scandal had turned her into a laughingstock among Lagos elites. Her phone calls were ignored, her spa appointments cancelled, and friends who once envied her whispered behind her back. But Ivy was not the kind of woman to accept defeat. She had been born into privilege, trained in manipulation, and perfected the art of appearances. And now she would channel every drop of her pain into vengeance. The woman responsible for all this, Amara, had to pay. Not with gossip or petty fights. No, Ivy wanted her gone. Erased. She contacted a man she hadn't spoken to in years, Kojo, a former lover turned political fixer. He was the kind of man who operated in the shadows, whose hands had touched blood and whose soul had long been sold. They met in a gated compound under the guise of business. I need a problem solved, Ivy said coolly, sliding a photo of Amara across the table. Her name is Amara. She destroyed my marriage. I want her gone. Kojo studied the image. Gone as in silenced or gone as in forever? He asked, his tone casual as if they were discussing a stain on a carpet. Ivy didn't hesitate. Forever. Kojo raised a brow, slightly impressed. And the husband? Ivy sipped her drink slowly. Him too. But make it clean. No trails. No noise. I don't want to be connected. Kojo leaned back and smiled. That will cost you. Ivy nodded. Money is not a problem. She wrote a figure on a napkin. He whistled softly. Consider it done. As she left the meeting, the wind blew through her silk scarf, but she didn't feel it. Her heart was heavy with hatred, yet strangely at peace. For the first time since her humiliation began, she felt in control again. While the world saw her as the scorned wife, she was already planning something far more sinister. Desmond had made a mistake thinking he could shame her and walk away clean. And Amara, that naive little thing, would soon learn that stealing another woman's husband came with a price. Ivy no longer wanted apologies, explanations, or justice. She wanted to watch them suffer. She wanted to see their names on the news again, not for romance or business but for tragedy. And in the twisted depths of her soul, she began to feel something disturbingly close to joy. Her pain would soon have an outlet. And this time there would be no confessions, no forgiveness. Only silence. Permanent, eternal silence. Amara moved into a quiet apartment in Lekki, far from the mansion where it all began. Desmond had arranged everything, from her relocation to the monthly allowance, even insisting she stop working for now. Lay low, he had said. The media will calm down soon. But Amara wasn't just worried about headlines. She hadn't seen Ivy since the confession, but something inside her said the woman wouldn't let this go. Ivy had looked at her once, long before the truth came out, a stare so cold it felt like a curse. Now, in the silence of her new home, Amara found herself jumping at every knock, checking the locks twice and scanning faces on the street. Her heart was in constant overdrive, and though Desmond tried to reassure her with gifts and promises, she knew danger didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it came dressed in silence. Still, she had no one else to turn to. Her family knew nothing. The world thought she was a mistress who broke a marriage, but only she knew the truth. She had been used by both sides. Desmond, meanwhile, was dealing with his own demons. The scandal had bruised his brand, shaken boardrooms, and triggered rumors of instability in his businesses. But he had weathered worse. His real concern wasn't the press, it was Amara. He hadn't expected to care about her this deeply. At first she was a mistake, a temptation, a weakness. But her honesty, her vulnerability, and the way she stood by her truth, even knowing the cost, had pierced something in him. She reminded him of a part of himself he thought long buried, the part that once loved without caution. Now he felt a responsibility to protect her. Not just from the world but from Ivy. He hadn't underestimated Ivy's pride. He knew what she was capable of when scorned. But he didn't yet know how far she would go. His lawyers had finalized the divorce and the house had been split. But there was something in Ivy's silence that felt more dangerous than any public outrage. One night, while Amara slept, Desmond sat alone in her living room, scrolling through her phone's photos. There were no selfies, no designer bags, no clubbing, just pictures of her family, her late mother, and a few old graduation shots. She had lived a life far removed from luxury. He realized she didn't chase wealth, she chased peace. And now, because of him, that peace was gone. Guilt pressed hard on his chest. For the first time in years, Desmond felt afraid, not for his empire but for someone else's safety. As dawn broke, he called one of his security advisors and ordered full-time surveillance for Amara. She must not be left alone, he said. Even if she doesn't want it, I want eyes on her 24/7. The advisor agreed, sensing the seriousness in his tone. Desmond knew Ivy was quiet now, but a storm was coming. The question wasn't if, it was when. Kojo was a man who lived in silence. He didn't wear suits or drive flashy cars, yet he wielded more power in the underworld than many politicians did in public. He was efficient, meticulous, and had never failed a client. Ivy's request was personal, and personal jobs required patience. He began by watching. He had Amara followed for a week, studying her routine, noting her weaknesses. She was careful, never went out at night, rarely took public transport, always looked over her shoulder. Smart girl. But no one could stay hidden forever. He learned about Desmond's involvement too, the money trail, the new apartment, and the security team. It would make things harder but not impossible. Kojo's strategy was always to strike when emotions were low and attention was elsewhere. He had already paid off one of the security guards, a desperate man with a gambling habit. All it would take was a distraction, a power outage, a fake emergency, and the job would be done. Ivy was growing impatient. Weeks had passed and nothing had happened. She didn't like waiting. Every time she opened Instagram or heard someone mention Desmond's name, her blood boiled. She had given Kojo money, access, and even an alibi if needed. She wanted results. But when she confronted him, Kojo warned her, "You want it clean or you want it fast. You can't have both." Ivy gritted her teeth. Just make it happen. Yet even she began to question what she was doing. There were moments in the dark hours of the night when guilt crept in. Was she really planning to kill the man she once loved? The girl she once paid to do her dirty work? But each time doubt surfaced, she reminded herself of the laughter she had heard when Desmond and Amara were alone. The betrayal, the shame, the empty side of the bed. No, this wasn't murder. This was justice, twisted and blood-stained as it may be. On a Tuesday evening, Amara's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. She picked it up cautiously. A gruff voice said, "You need to leave that apartment tonight. Don't ask questions. You're not safe." The call ended. Her heart froze. She ran to the window and noticed a car parked across the street, one she had seen before. Suddenly everything clicked. The silence. The stares. The strange man at the grocery store. She grabbed her phone and called Desmond. He answered immediately and she whispered, "They're coming." Desmond was already moving. "Stay where you are. Don't open the door." "I'm on my way." Outside the wind howled. Inside, Amara stood frozen, her heart racing, unaware that death was already in the building, and time was running out. Amara backed away from the window, her breath caught between her ribs. The shadows outside danced against the streetlights, each one threatening to come alive. She didn't know who had called or why they warned her, but something in the voice had sounded urgent, real. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, but her legs refused to move. Instead, she stood frozen, every sound amplified: the ticking wall clock, the creak of the ceiling fan, the hum of the refrigerator. Suddenly the lights blinked twice and went out. Darkness swallowed the room, and with it came a silence too loud to ignore. Amara's heart lurched. Power outages weren't rare in Lagos, but the timing was too precise. She reached for her phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the room. Her bag. Her ID. Her pepper spray. She needed to get out, but as she approached the door she heard it, soft footsteps just outside. Her phone slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. The door handle rattled gently as if someone was testing it. Amara's chest tightened. She stumbled backward, eyes locked on the door, every second stretching into eternity. Then a whisper came from the other side. Amara? It wasn't Desmond's voice. It wasn't anyone she recognized. She didn't wait to hear more. She darted toward the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife from the drawer, and ran into the bedroom, locking the door behind her. Her hands trembled as she dialed Desmond again. He picked up. "I'm downstairs," he said breathlessly. "Stay inside." A minute later she heard heavy footsteps storming up the stairs, followed by loud banging and the sound of a scuffle. Desmond kicked open the door, gun in hand, followed by two of his private security men. They found Amara crouched in the corner, the knife still gripped tightly in her hands. Her eyes were wide with terror. Desmond rushed to her, holding her face gently. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I've got you." Desmond's security team apprehended a man trying to escape through the emergency stairwell. It was the same security officer who had been paid off, caught red-handed with a concealed weapon and cash in his pocket. Desmond was livid. He personally beat the man until his guards pulled him away. Later that night, after handing the man over to the police, Desmond sat beside Amara, who hadn't said a word in hours. He had failed her. He had promised protection and nearly lost her. "This isn't random," he murmured. "This is Ivy." Amara nodded weakly. She knew it too. "She wants us dead." Desmond's eyes narrowed with resolve. "Then I'm going to end this. No more hiding. No more running. If she wants war, I'll give her war." That night, Desmond made 2 calls. The first to his lawyer, to begin proceedings for a full investigation. The second to a powerful journalist. If Ivy wanted to destroy lives, Desmond would expose her to the world. The game had changed and he no longer intended to play fair. Ivy sat in her marble bathtub, sipping wine and humming to herself. She hadn't heard from Kojo in days, but she wasn't worried. Silence often meant progress. She imagined Amara's face the moment everything went black. She imagined Desmond's grief and confusion. The fantasy brought her peace, until her phone buzzed with a strange notification. She opened it. A breaking news alert flashed across her screen. Attempted assassination foiled at home of former maid linked to Desmond Uma scandal. Suspect apprehended. Her wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the tub. She read the headline again, then again. They knew. Somehow they knew. Panic surged through her like venom. She dialed Kojo's number. No answer. She called again and again until finally, a robotic voice responded, "This number is no longer available." Her chest tightened. Kojo had vanished. The job had failed. And now Desmond would know. Everything was unraveling. That evening, as Ivy stepped outside her estate in Victoria Island, cameras flashed from every direction. Reporters bombarded her with questions. "Did you order a hit on Amara? Are you responsible for the attack? What's your connection to the man arrested?" Her carefully curated reputation crumbled with every flash. She pushed through the crowd, humiliated, trying to get to her car. Inside, her phone rang again, her lawyer. His voice was urgent. "There's an official investigation now. Desmond has filed charges. The arrested man is talking. He's claiming you paid him through an intermediary named Kojo." Ivy clutched her head. "Tell him to deny everything," she screamed. "We'll bury the story." But even she knew it was too late. Desmond wasn't just a man, he was a machine. And once he started rolling, there was no stopping him. She had tried to ruin him with secrets. Now he would destroy her with truth. By the next morning, her name was on every news outlet in the country. Former first ladies denounced her. Business partners froze her accounts. Luxury brands cut off ties. Her reputation wasn't just tarnished, it was obliterated. But Desmond wasn't done. He gave an exclusive interview to a respected media house, detailing how his wife had manipulated his marriage, orchestrated seduction, and then attempted to have him and Amara killed. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He simply laid out the facts, supported by evidence, security footage, and the testimony of the captured man. The country was stunned. Ivy's fanbase collapsed. Feminist groups withdrew support. Even her own father called her a disgrace. Ivy watched it all from her living room, trembling, her fingers shaking as she reached for another glass of wine. Her pride was gone. Her mask had shattered. And for the first time in her life, Ivy Uma felt something she had never known before: fear. Desmond sat in his office, overlooking the Lagos skyline, a man both victorious and weary. The press conference had done its job. Ivy's image had collapsed like a sandcastle under waves. But there was no joy in his victory, only relief that Amara was safe. He had spent years building walls around his heart, protecting his name, his empire. Yet one woman's betrayal had nearly brought it all down. And another woman, soft-spoken, loyal, and undeserving of the chaos, had helped him find clarity. As he watched the city pulse beneath him, his thoughts returned to Amara. She was resting now, but the trauma of the attack had left its mark. She no longer laughed the way she used to. Her smile was smaller, cautious. He couldn't undo the damage, but he could make sure it never happened again. He had tripled her security detail, hired a trauma therapist, and made arrangements for her to leave the country if necessary. He wouldn't lose her. Not again. Meanwhile, Ivy was summoned for interrogation. The police had connected Kojo to her through hotel CCTV footage and financial transactions. The man they arrested had flipped, admitting he was paid through Kojo and revealing text messages that implicated Ivy. She was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted assassination, and obstruction of justice. Her high-profile lawyer tried to argue entrapment and character defamation, but the evidence was damning. Ivy's eyes remained cold as she was led into the courtroom in designer shades and handcuffs. The media swarmed the scene. Former allies distanced themselves. Even her mother refused to speak on her behalf. Ivy was alone now, stripped of power, stripped of respect. But inside the fire still burned. She wasn't done. She still had secrets, and if Desmond thought this was over, he had underestimated her yet again. Her empire was gone, but her vengeance was not. And prison, she realized, was just another battlefield. Amara sat on a balcony in a secured estate Desmond had relocated her to. She watched the sunset with tired eyes. Every day since the attack felt borrowed. She had nightmares, flinched at sudden sounds, and avoided mirrors. She often wondered if she had made the right choice, telling Desmond the truth, opening her heart. But then she remembered Ivy's eyes, sharp, vengeful, and cold. If she had stayed silent, she would have been buried quietly, remembered only as a scandal. Now at least she had a voice. Desmond joined her, placing a warm hand on hers. "I promise you, Amara," he said softly, "no one will ever hurt you again." She nodded, her heart still heavy. They were not yet healed. The war was not yet over. But for the first time they had hope. And sometimes hope was the strongest weapon of all. Inside her prison cell, Ivy sat on a thin mattress, her once regal posture diminished to a bent silhouette. The fluorescent lights above buzzed annoyingly, casting harsh shadows over her face. The walls reeked of bleach and sweat, but Ivy had stopped noticing. Her mind was consumed by a single flame of thought: they think it's over. She had watched her fall from grace in real time, first the online backlash, then the courtroom ridicule, and now the physical confinement of prison. But through all of it, her pride hadn't completely shattered. No. Her rage had crystallized into a cold, calculated silence. Behind those high prison walls, she was already crafting a new plan. The outside world believed she had lost, but Ivy had contacts, secrets, and leverage. One call, one name whispered to the right ear, and the chain would begin. Her war wasn't over, it was merely paused. And Amara? That girl would not get to live a peaceful life. Not after everything. In the dead of night, Ivy called on someone only a few knew existed: Zubi, a shadow figure from her family's past. He wasn't an assassin like Kojo, nor a typical criminal. He was far more dangerous. A manipulator of systems, a weaver of chaos. She wrote his contact on the back of a smuggled cigarette pack and paid a guard to get the message out. "Finish what Kojo started," she wrote. "But this time make them both vanish without a trace." Zubi never responded with words. He didn't need to. Days later, a suspicious fire broke out at the evidence warehouse where Ivy's case files were kept. Though quickly extinguished, 2 boxes went missing. Then one of the main witnesses mysteriously withdrew his testimony. The prosecution panicked. Rumors of bribery surfaced. The judge delayed proceedings. Even from behind bars, Ivy's influence leaked through cracks in the system like poison. Desmond had started a war thinking it would end in court. But Ivy had moved the battlefield, and the next shot would not come from a courtroom. Back in Lekki, Amara tried to live normally, but something inside her was broken. Each morning she woke up gasping for air, dreams of masked intruders dragging her into darkness haunting her sleep. She tried therapy, exercise, journaling, nothing worked. The worst part wasn't the fear of death anymore. It was the guilt. She had been part of the setup, even if unknowingly. Her presence in Desmond's life had cost too many people their peace. She began to withdraw from him, politely but painfully. She declined dinners, shortened phone calls, and pretended to be busy when he checked in. Desmond noticed. One night, he sat her down and asked, "Are you leaving me?" She hesitated. "I don't want to bring more trouble to your life," she whispered. But Desmond shook his head. "You didn't bring trouble. You exposed the truth. And that's why I'll protect you, even if it costs me everything." She broke down, crying into his chest, wishing it was that simple. But neither of them knew that Zubi had already begun watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Zubi was not a man of mercy. Where Kojo had relied on fear and brute force, Zubi used silence and psychology. His first step was surveillance, not just of Amara, but of Desmond's entire operation. He studied their movements, their routines, the security loopholes Desmond thought were airtight. His favorite weapon was misdirection. One morning, Amara received a mysterious package, a box with no return address, wrapped in fine ribbon. Inside was a framed photo of her mother, who had died 2 years earlier. But the photo was defaced, her mother's eyes crossed out with red ink. No note. No threat. Just the silent horror of knowing someone had been inside her past. Amara collapsed onto the floor, the frame shattering beside her. Desmond rushed in after hearing her scream and saw the photo. "This isn't just a message," he said through clenched teeth. "It's a warning." They called the police. The case was filed. But there were no fingerprints, no footage, no trace. Just Zubi's message, "You'll never know when I'm coming." Meanwhile, Ivy watched from her prison cell, a quiet smile tugging at her lips as the prison radio reported, no arrests have been made in the home intrusion and intimidation incident involving Desmond Uma's partner. She imagined the terror in Amara's eyes and savored it like aged wine. She had always known Desmond's weakness. He needed control, certainty, logic. But what if everything around him became chaos? What if Amara began to question her safety every minute of the day? Love couldn't survive in a war zone. Ivy's plan wasn't to kill immediately, not yet. It was to unravel them first. To break Amara mentally, to make her too scared to be near Desmond. To make Desmond paranoid enough to turn cold again. Only then would the final blow land, clean, effective, irreversible. And while Desmond fought the ghosts outside his door, Ivy planned to walk out of prison a misunderstood woman, claiming innocence and conspiracy. Desmond took Amara to a secure hotel in Abuja, desperate to shake off whatever threat loomed in Lagos. But the damage had been done. Amara barely ate. She stayed curled up, barely responding to his comfort. The photo had broken something deep within her, the thought of her dead mother being used to torment her soul. What if she never stops? Amara whispered. What if this is my life now? Desmond didn't have an answer. His tech team had been unable to trace the package, the security feeds showed nothing, and the authorities were useless. They were fighting an enemy that didn't exist in plain sight. He began to question his own empire. How could a man with billions, bodyguards, and surveillance still be so helpless? One night, while Amara slept, Desmond stepped onto the balcony and lit a cigar with shaking hands. A message arrived on his phone. "You can't protect what's already broken." It was inside. No number. Just a message from the void. He crushed the phone in his fist. The war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. 3 days later, the media caught wind of the photo incident, thanks to a leak from within the police station. Headlines blared, "Amara under psychological attack," and "The Billionaire love story turning into a nightmare." Desmond was furious, knowing the leak wasn't random, it was tactical. Zubi was not just trying to kill them physically but dismantle them emotionally and publicly. He held a press conference to denounce the harassment, doubling the reward for any information on Ivy's outside collaborators. "We will not be silenced," he declared. But behind the camera flashes and declarations of power, Desmond felt his grip slipping. His empire was intact, but his heart, Amara, was withering under the weight of invisible war. No amount of security could ease the dread in her eyes. She rarely smiled now. Her laughter was a distant memory. And every day she became a little more distant from him. Ivy's legal team, sensing the shifting tide, filed a petition for her bail. They argued that there was insufficient direct evidence linking her to the attacks. The judge agreed to a hearing. Though the prosecution objected fiercely, the law favored process over passion. Inside the courtroom, Ivy appeared in modest clothing, her hair tied back, no makeup, the picture of a fallen woman seeking redemption. She even shed a few tears during her testimony, claiming she was being framed by political enemies of her husband. The public, always hungry for scandal but quick to forgive beauty, began to waver. Some whispered she was innocent, that perhaps Desmond had staged it all to protect his mistress. The narrative began to shift, fueled by well-placed influencers on social media. Ivy was a monster, yes, but monsters were sometimes made, not born. And the court of public opinion started leaning toward her side again. Desmond knew what was happening. He recognized the pattern. Ivy wasn't just trying to destroy them, she was trying to rewrite the story. The woman who had plotted murder was now being seen as the victim. He couldn't allow that. He had one final card to play, a confidential recording from Kojo himself, a dying message captured just days before he disappeared. In it, Kojo detailed Ivy's plan, her payments, and even the order to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Desmond had kept the recording hidden, hoping never to use it. But now it was time. The day before Ivy's bail hearing, Desmond leaked the audio to the press. It spread like wildfire. The court erupted. Bail was denied. Ivy was returned to her cell in disgrace. But Desmond knew this victory would only escalate the war. And when monsters are cornered, they become even more dangerous. Somewhere deep in the shadows, Zuby smiled, because chaos was his kingdom and the game was far from over. Zuby watched the news with mild amusement. Kojo's voice had done more damage than any bullet could. Ivy was now shackled by both the justice system and public condemnation, but Zuby didn't care about Ivy's reputation or her tears. He cared about the contract, and the contract wasn't over. She wanted them gone and he intended to deliver. Desmond's latest move had shifted the battlefield again, putting Zuby on notice. But Zuby thrived under pressure. He didn't flinch at tighter surveillance or Desmond's newfound desperation. He began laying the groundwork for the final act. This time it wouldn't be a message or a threat. This time it would be an explosion, one that left no doubt. He contacted a supplier in Port Harcourt, secured untraceable explosives, and began gathering intel on Desmond's travel plans. Through a bribe to a hotel staff member, he confirmed Desmond and Amara would be attending a charity gala in Abuja, at a 5-star venue. That would be the moment. No guards, no safe houses. Just lights, laughter, and death. Amara, meanwhile, had begun trying to heal. Therapy was helping. Desmond's persistence in standing by her gave her strength. But she still felt the crack in her spirit, a wound not yet closed. She missed the simple life she once had, poor yes but peaceful. Now she lived surrounded by cameras, guards, and a man whose love had become both her blessing and her burden. She wore elegant gowns, but each seam felt like a cage. When Desmond invited her to the Abuja gala, she hesitated. "We should stay low," she whispered. But he insisted. "Let them see we're not afraid." And so she agreed, not knowing that agreeing meant walking into the lion's mouth. As they boarded the private jet, Amara looked out the window and muttered a silent prayer. Not for luxury, not for protection, but for closure. She wanted the nightmare to end, even if it meant facing it head-on. The gala was a masterpiece of glamour. Shimmering lights, celebrity guests, and an orchestra playing smooth jazz beneath crystal chandeliers. Desmond and Amara arrived dressed in black elegance. Cameras flashed. Socialites whispered. The couple, once wrapped in scandal, now looked like royalty reborn. Desmond gave a short speech about second chances, forgiveness, and resilience. It was powerful, humble, and dignified. Amara stood beside him like a queen, poised, elegant, and quietly strong. But Zuby was there too, disguised as a hotel staff member, moving freely among the corridors with a staff badge and a catering tray concealing something far deadlier than champagne. He placed the device behind the stage platform where Desmond would return for a closing toast. 10 minutes. That's all he needed. But just as he stepped away, a familiar voice crackled through the hotel earpiece. "Security alert. Unknown device detected near ballroom stage. Lock down all exits." Zuby froze. Someone had spotted it. He slipped into the crowd, already preparing a backup plan. The blast didn't go off, but it didn't have to. Desmond now knew they weren't safe. Not even here. Desmond stared at the bomb technician's report, his heart pounding. The device had been real. It wasn't a bluff or a warning, it was intended to kill. The only thing that saved them was a sharp-eyed assistant stagehand who noticed a strange wire sticking from the base of the podium. Desmond didn't sleep that night. He sat in his hotel suite with Amara curled beside him, her hand resting on his chest as though trying to calm the storm within. He had pushed too far. He had exposed her again, believing his name, his security, his power could protect them. But now the war had reached its boiling point. Zuby was no longer playing games. He was hunting them. The terrifying part wasn't that Desmond didn't know where Zuby was, it was that Zuby seemed to know everything about them. Their movements, their plans, even the layout of the event. This wasn't about fame anymore. This was survival. And Desmond knew what he had to do next: take the fight straight to the monster. He flew back to Lagos in the dead of night and assembled a war room of his most trusted private operatives. Men who had protected foreign presidents and dismantled smuggling rings. I want Zuby found. I don't care what it takes. Dead or alive, Desmond said, his voice cold with fury. He had never crossed this line before, ordering the elimination of another human being, but this wasn't business anymore. It was personal. They scoured surveillance footage, hacked phone records, tracked black market purchases. Slowly, a map began to form. They traced Zuby's last known movements to an old compound on the outskirts of Ogun State. It was a fortified property with watchtowers and underground bunkers. Desmond authorized a full raid. But even then Zuby had vanished, again. What they found inside sent a chill down every spine. Dozens of photos of Amara taken at different locations, some as recent as 2 days prior. In one she was brushing her hair by the window. In another sleeping on a couch. They realized then, Zuby wasn't just hunting her. He was studying her. Back in her apartment, Amara found herself unable to breathe. Desmond hadn't told her the details, but she had sensed the shift in his energy. He walked like a man carrying invisible chains, looked at her like she might disappear any moment. And she felt it too, the invisible presence, the cold breath of death circling them. I can't live like this, she told Desmond when he returned. Looking over my shoulder, waiting to die. Desmond took her hands in his. Then we end it now. He opened a folder and showed her everything, the compound, the photos, the escape routes. Amara's eyes widened. He was inside watching me, she whispered. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Desmond made a decision that night. You're leaving Nigeria, he said. I've arranged a new identity, a home, security, everything. You'll be safe. Amara shook her head. Not without you. But Desmond was firm. If I come with you, he'll find us. I need to finish this. They embraced, hearts breaking. Neither of them said goodbye. They just held on, because letting go would make it real. Zuby sat in an abandoned textile warehouse in Port Harcourt, watching the Lagos news on a dusty television. The story about the failed bomb attempt had gone viral, but it was the security leak afterward that interested him. Desmond was hunting him now. Good, Zuby muttered. Let him come. He admired Desmond's boldness. Most rich men relied on others to fight for them. But Desmond was different. He had heart. That made him dangerous. But it also made him predictable. Zuby figured Desmond would try to flush him out. He welcomed it. He had prepared traps before Desmond even knew there would be a war. He had rigged false leads, paid informants to misdirect, and even placed a fake safehouse location on the dark web. What he didn't count on, however, was Amara. In his mind she would be the fragile one, the weak link. But her sudden disappearance rattled him. His obsession with her wasn't just professional anymore. It had grown into something twisted, something personal. He needed to find her again. And that meant drawing Desmond out of hiding. Desmond anticipated this. He knew Zuby would try to use Amara's location as bait. So he created a false trail. He leaked a fake manifest of Amara's travel to Ghana, knowing Zuby's network would bite. Zuby took the bait. He sent one of his men to intercept her at the Accra airport. What he didn't know was that Desmond had lured him into an international trap. The moment Zuby's man landed, Interpol was waiting. He was arrested within minutes and flipped under pressure. Within 24 hours, Desmond had the exact coordinates of Zuby's real hideout. This time there would be no mercy. Desmond personally led the operation alongside trusted mercenaries. They stormed the warehouse at dawn, smoke bombs and flash grenades ripping through the silence. Zuby tried to run, but Desmond tackled him at the exit. They fought, brutal, bloody, savage. Years of rage and fear exploded in fists and fury. Desmond punched until his hands bled. You looked into her window, he roared. You sent killers to my home. This ends now. When the dust settled, Zuby lay unconscious, bleeding, surrounded by armed guards. Desmond stood over him, chest heaving. For a moment he considered ending it right there, one bullet, one justice. But he remembered Amara's eyes. She didn't need more death. She needed peace. He ordered Zuby to be handed over to authorities with full evidence. "Let the law finish what I started," he said. News broke within the hour. Zuby, mastermind of the Uma scandal, captured in Port Harcourt. The nation exploded with relief and praise. Amara, watching the news from her safe house overseas, cried for the first time not from fear, but from freedom. Desmond called her that night. "It's over," he said. She didn't reply for several seconds. Then her voice came, soft, full of emotion. "Now come to me, Desmond. Come home." The flight to Amsterdam was long, quiet, and heavy with reflection. Desmond sat by the window, watching clouds pass beneath the jet like silent ghosts. He had fought wars in boardrooms, battled for market shares, and defeated rivals in courtrooms. But this war, the one for Amara, had almost cost him everything. Zuby was in custody now, facing multiple charges from attempted murder to terrorism. Ivy's fate was sealed as well. With the new evidence extracted from Zuby's captured phone, videos, messages, voice recordings, the court had reopened her case. She would not see freedom again. Desmond should have felt victorious. But instead he felt hollow. The war was over, yes, but what of the lives lost along the way? His peace of mind, Amara's safety, their happiness, everything had been shaken to its core. As the jet descended toward the private runway, Desmond took a deep breath. Amara was waiting. And for the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking like a CEO. He was thinking like a man who wanted to love and be loved. Amara stood at the edge of the estate's private garden, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes lost in the horizon. Europe's winter had kissed the air with a soft chill, but she barely felt it. She had read about Zuby's capture and Ivy's final trial. It should have brought closure, and perhaps it did in part. But scars weren't just physical. The emotional ones ran deeper. Even though she was safe now, surrounded by security and silence, she often woke up in cold sweats. Her mother's defaced photographs still haunted her. There were days she didn't speak to anyone. But Desmond's voice, always checking in, always present, had become her tether. And now he was coming. She turned when she heard the distant hum of a jet, and for the first time in weeks, her lips trembled into a smile. Not because she was healed, but because the one person who never gave up on her was finally close enough to hold. Their reunion was wordless. Desmond stepped off the jet, dropped his bag, and wrapped his arms around her like a man reclaiming a part of his soul. She sobbed into his chest, not out of pain but from the release of months of pressure. They held each other under the cloudy sky, unmoving, letting their heartbeats align. That night they talked for hours, not about the past, not about what was lost, but about what they could still build. Desmond told her he was stepping down temporarily from his companies. "I've spent too long chasing profits. It's time I chased peace." Amara didn't respond immediately, just laid her head on his shoulder. That was her answer. They would stay in Amsterdam for now, far from the flashing cameras, away from whispers and wounds. Here they would begin again, not as CEO and servant, not as scandal and survivor, but as two people who had walked through fire and still chose love. In Nigeria, the courtrooms overflowed with spectators, journalists, and legal minds desperate to witness the fall of Ivy Uma. Once regarded as a queen among Lagos elite, Ivy now stood shackled in a dull prison uniform, her face devoid of the charm that once defined her. Her legal team had shrunk, half had withdrawn, citing conflict of interest. The other half stayed, more for publicity than loyalty. The evidence presented was damning: voice notes from Kojo, financial records of illegal transactions, surveillance footage of secret meetings, and Zuby's confession. Ivy remained stone-faced as the judge read the charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, illegal surveillance, and obstruction of justice. She pleaded not guilty, of course. But even she knew it was only formalities now. The gavel was already halfway down. Desmond didn't attend the trial. He watched it from a private stream with Amara beside him. He had no desire to gloat, no interest in revenge. He only needed closure. When the verdict was announced, life imprisonment without parole, Amara reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. Ivy was escorted out of the courtroom, head bowed, ignoring the cameras flashing around her like vultures swarming a corpse. She didn't weep. She didn't scream. She simply walked, her pride finally broken. But even in that moment, as she vanished from the courtroom forever, Desmond felt a strange sense of pity. Not for her crimes, they were unforgivable, but for the woman she once was. A woman he had loved. A woman who, in trying to test his loyalty, had destroyed her own soul. After the sentence, Desmond made a public statement. It was brief and graceful. Let this be a lesson. Love is not a weapon and truth is not weakness. May justice remind us that power must come with honor. The statement went viral, praised for its maturity. Overnight, Desmond Uma transformed from a scandal-ridden CEO to a symbol of resilience. Investors returned. Stocks rose. But more importantly, the noise finally faded. Amara's name was no longer trending for drama, but for strength. She was invited to speak at a virtual women's empowerment conference. Desmond encouraged her to go. Your story isn't something to hide, he told her. It's something to own. And for the first time, Amara stood in front of a camera and shared her truth, not as the woman who broke a marriage, but as the woman who survived betrayal, manipulation, and near death, and still had the courage to love. Spring arrived in Amsterdam like a quiet whisper. The snow melted, revealing green gardens and new beginnings. Desmond and Amara settled into a rhythm, cooking together, long walks by the canal, lazy evenings with books and music. They laughed more now. The silence that once choked them had lifted. There were still shadows, still moments of tension when the past tried to crawl back, but they faced them together. Desmond started painting again, something he hadn't done since university. Amara began working with a refugee support group, teaching English and sharing her story with women who had lost more than just money or names. Women who had lost trust. Their days were simple, but it was in that simplicity that they rediscovered themselves, not as headlines, not as victims, but as whole people. Desmond proposed again, not with diamonds or grandeur, but with a handwritten note hidden in her journal. Marry me. This time, let's write our story on clean pages. Amara found it and wept. Not because she was unsure, but because she never imagined someone would still choose her after all the scars. They married quietly under an old maple tree near the countryside. Just a handful of friends, a violinist, and handwritten vows. No press. No designer gowns. Just truth. And when Desmond placed the ring on her finger, he whispered, "This isn't a reward for surviving. It's a promise that you never have to fight alone again." She kissed him, and for the first time, love didn't feel fragile. It felt earned. That evening, as they danced in their small garden beneath lantern lights, Amara looked up at the stars and whispered to herself, "It's over." But Desmond heard her and pulled her closer. "No," he said gently. "It's just beginning." They had lost time, lost peace, nearly lost their lives, but in the ashes of betrayal and blood, something stronger had risen. A love that was flawed, tested, and real. And as they held each other in the quiet of that night, there were no more threats. No more fear. Only freedom. Only peace. And the knowledge that even in a world of deceit, the truth had not just survived, it had won. Here is the final chapter, chapter 20 of The Loyalty Trap, written with deep emotion and closure, bringing this intense journey of betrayal, regret, and redemption to a powerful end. Not rushed, not marked by headlines or scandals, but by simple days filled with healing, growth, and grace. Desmond and Amara's life in Amsterdam had become a sanctuary, not just from the chaos of their past, but from the versions of themselves they once were. He was no longer just the billionaire CEO chased by paparazzi or haunted by betrayal. She was no longer just the servant used as a pawn or the woman society tried to destroy. Together they had found something more profound than fame or fortune. They had found peace. Every morning began with coffee on the terrace, soft laughter over scrambled eggs, and books read under the warmth of a European sun. The storm had come, raged, and gone, but the silence it left behind was not empty. It was sacred. Desmond occasionally received emails from his companies, updates about board meetings and stock movements, but he rarely responded. He had handed over leadership to a trusted partner and now only watched from afar. The only meetings that mattered now were with Amara, planning trips, building a life, dreaming without fear. Amara, on the other hand, had blossomed into a quiet force. She became a mentor at the refugee center, guiding young women who had suffered abuse, manipulation, and betrayal. Her story, once used to shame her, had become her weapon of light. She was invited to speak in Berlin, then Paris, then Geneva. Desmond accompanied her sometimes, proud of the woman she had become. When asked what kept her going, Amara always gave the same answer: "Love gave me a reason to fight. Truth gave me the courage to win." One evening, as they sat by the canal watching the sunset reflect off the water, Amara turned to Desmond and said, "Do you ever miss Nigeria?" He smiled faintly. "I miss the smell of jollof rice at roadside joints, the way the sky looks just before it rains." She leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you think we'll ever go back? He didn't answer immediately. Then softly, maybe. When the country remembers us not by the scandal, but by how we survived it. They sat in silence after that, their hands intertwined, no longer hiding, no longer running. They had lost everything, status, trust, even their innocence. But what they had rebuilt was far stronger than anything they had known before. A life not made of power but of purpose. A love not born from perfection but from pain and truth. And so, beneath the fading light of a golden sky, in a city far from the one that had broken them, they found what they had never known they needed. Not revenge, not validation, but peace. The kind of peace that only comes after a storm that tried and failed to swallow them. And as the last light danced across the water, Amara whispered a final thought, one that had taken her months to accept. We were tested by fire, but we didn't burn. Desmond pulled her closer and smiled. No, he said. We became gold. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tales by Tochi for more.